Well, the invitation didn't arrive the way people imagine these things do. No envelope, no notification, no dramatic moment where the world paused and pointed in your direction. It came quietly. So quietly that if you weren't paying attention to your own inner shift, you might have missed it entirely. It felt like wait before it felt like opportunity, like the air around your life suddenly grew denser, more intentional. As if something unseen leaned forward and decided to look closer. They always said no one was watching. That silence meant irrelevance. That if you weren't loud, you weren't moving forward. That if you weren't visible, you didn't matter. For a long time, you almost believed them. You watched the noise rise around you. People performing progress instead of building it. You saw them mistake attention for importance, volume for influence. You watched applause become their fuel, validation their compass. Every move documented, every thought announced, every moment turned into proof they existed, and you stayed quiet. You stayed in the background where no one clapped. In the hours that didn't get recorded. In the effort that didn't get rewarded immediately. In the discipline that felt invisible even to you some days. They assumed you disappeared. They told each other you couldn't keep up. They whispered that you fell off. They mistook your silence for surrender. They were wrong. Silence was never absence. Silence was preparation. While they were busy being seen, you were busy becoming. You learned when no one was teaching. You refined your craft without an audience. You kept showing up long after quitting would have been reasonable. That part never made noise. That part never announced itself. And because people who confuse power with attention rarely understand restraint, they never noticed what was happening beneath the surface. They don't see foundations being poured. They don't measure progress that doesn't post itself. They don't recognize strength unless it performs on command. But the invitation you just received didn't come from that world. It came from a different layer entirely. A layer where results matter more than recognition. Where consistency outweighs charisma. Where patterns speak louder than promises. You weren't noticed because you demanded attention. You were recognized because your behavior stayed the same under pressure. They noticed how you moved when nothing was guaranteed. How you showed up when no one would have blamed you for walking away. How you kept your standards intact when lowering them would have bought you comfort. They noticed how you handled rejection without turning bitter. How you handled isolation without becoming desperate. How you handled being overlooked without losing your direction. Most people break there. They either chase validation or shrink themselves to survive. They get louder, or smaller, or resentful. You didn't. You became precise. You learned when to speak. And when silence did more work. You learned how to walk away without needing the last word. You learned how to build in private without asking if anyone would ever see it. That's when the evaluation really began. Not the kind you apply for. Not the kind with interviews and rehearsed answers. The kind where your life itself becomes the evidence. Every choice logged. Every reaction remembered. Every moment where integrity cost you something. They watched you choose the harder option when the easier one was right there. They watched you stay aligned when drifting would have helped you fit in faster. They watched you absorb pressure instead of passing it on. Slowly, quietly, something became clear. You weren't chasing a seat. You were becoming someone who could hold one. That's why this invitation didn't come with instructions. That's why no one announced it publicly. That's why nothing around you looks dramatically different yet. Because this isn't about permission. It's about capacity. The kind of opportunity approaching you doesn't care how badly you want it. It cares how well you trained for it without knowing it was coming. And now, the weight is shifting. You might feel it as responsibility increasing before recognition does. As pressure showing up without explanation. As expectations rising without a title attached. This is the testing phase. Not to see if you're talented, but to see if you stay consistent when the stakes rise. Because what comes next won't reward performance. It will expose instability, and the same silence that protected you before will be required again. You're not arriving yet. That's the part most people misunderstand. They think recognition is a finish line. They think being noticed means the work is over. For you, it's the opposite. This phase doesn't explode outward, it tightens inward. Life gets quieter, not emptier. The distractions lose their grip first. Things that once demanded your attention suddenly feel repetitive, shallow, misaligned. Conversations that used to excite you now feel like echoes. People who thrived on noise slowly drift out of your orbit. Not with conflict, not with drama, but with distance. And that's when it becomes unsettling. Because you realize you're no longer being shaped by reaction. You're being shaped by responsibility. Up until now, you proved you could survive pressure. What comes next is proving you can hold influence without losing yourself. That's a different test entirely. This is where most people fail, quietly. Not because they aren't capable, but because they mistake access for arrival. They confuse proximity with importance. They start speaking before understanding the room they've entered. You don't. You notice before you act. You listen longer than expected. You pay attention to what isn't being said. You've learned something others haven't. Real power doesn't rush. It waits. It watches who collapses under anticipation, who overextends to be seen, who trades restraint for validation the moment the door cracks open. You don't collapse, because you've already lived through waiting with no guarantee attached. You've already built without promises. You've already learned how to exist without applause. That's why this phase feels heavier than struggle ever did. Struggle was loud. Struggle had enemies you could name. Struggle gave you something to push against. This doesn't. This is weight without resistance. Expectation without instruction. Rooms where people observe without staring. Moments where your response matters more than your explanation. You start to feel it in the way decisions land now. They carry consequence beyond you. What you tolerate sends signals. What you ignore defines boundaries. What you engage with shapes perception. This isn't about being right anymore. It's about being precise. You begin to notice how few people ever make it past this threshold, not because they lack skill, but because they need to be acknowledged too soon. They need credit. They need reassurance. They need the story to include their name before the structure is complete. You learn to operate without that. That's why the invitation didn't feel like excitement. It felt like gravity, because gravity doesn't ask if you're ready. It just pulls. And now the pull is forward, not faster, deeper. You begin to understand the difference between opportunity and alignment. Opportunity demands energy. Alignment conserves it. Things meant for you don't require persuasion. They require steadiness. So you slow down where others rush. You observe where others announce. You choose restraint where others perform. And that restraint speaks louder than anything you could say. People respond differently to you now. Not warmer, not colder, more deliberate. They weigh their words. They pause before committing. They listen more carefully than they used to. Not because you demanded respect, but because your presence stopped asking for permission. You're no longer auditioning. You're already inside the structure. And structures don't revolve around personalities. They revolve around reliability. That's when you realize the real shift happened long before this moment. Back when you chose discipline over attention. Back when you chose silence over reaction. Back when you chose growth over validation. Everything since then has just been confirmation. Doubt may still surface now, but it's different, quieter, internal. Am I ready for this? What if I misstep? What if I don't belong here? That doubt isn't weakness. It's calibration. It means you understand the weight of what you're stepping into. Confidence proves nothing. Consistency proves everything. So you stay consistent. You don't overreach. You don't shrink. You don't explain yourself unnecessarily. You let your choices speak in a language only the right people understand. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the environment adjusts. You're no longer trying to be seen. You're being placed. Placed where your restraint becomes an asset. Placed where your silence isn't misread. Placed where something depends on you holding your ground. That's when clarity arrives, not as excitement, but as peace. Not celebration, not relief, peace. The kind that comes from knowing you don't need to rush what's already unfolding. The kind that comes from understanding the invitation was never a moment. It was a direction, and you've already been walking it. No announcement, no witnesses, no applause, just alignment tightening around you like a path that finally knows your name. This is what it feels like when preparation meets recognition. Not dramatic, not explosive, inevitable. And now that you're here, there's no going back. Not because you're better, but because you're responsible. Responsible for how you move, for what you allow, for what you build next. The invitation has already been accepted, not with words, but with the way you continue forward.